Hey class, it's Matt. I'm back. Technical issues have been resolved, and we shouldn't have any problems going on in the semester. With that said, today I just want to give you a quick, brief overview of Chapter 3 and discuss some important topics in that chapter. And then I also want to give you a rundown of those project guidelines, explain a couple things, and let you know that I am changing the due date to September 18th. That'll allow us to discuss this in class so that you guys can ask questions and get immediate answers, and I can give some explanations that might be needed about that project. With that said, the third thing I wanted to discuss is class. We have class this next week on the 13th from 6 to 9 p.m. Please make sure that you are there. It's very important that you attend. With this being a hybrid class, we only have 4 class periods. Those are required. They're not optional, so please make sure you attend. It should be interesting. We're going to have some engaging and I think fun activities for you to do that will hopefully help you in your learning. We're going to specifically focus on Chapter 4 and that. So with that said, let's get to Chapter 3 and give you a couple points to think about and some discussion. So let me share that PowerPoint with you. And I'm going to move box up here. Let's start here. Get the slideshow to start. There we go. And Chapter 3, the Empire Indians and the Struggle for Power in North America, 1670 to 1720. So this chapter covers a half century of different interactions and conflict between the European powers and the Native Americans, and also between the European powers and their colonies, and some of the relationships that change. And there's a lot societally and politically and militarily that's going to go on during this time. The 1670s and 1680s are a particularly tumultuous time in North America with between the colonies, the Spanish, French, and English colonies, all going through expansion periods and going through periods where they're having, because of that expansion and other issues, such as disease and continued warfare, where they're going to have some major conflicts pop up. For the Spanish, it's the Pueblo Revolt, and for France, for New France, it's the fight with the Iroquois nation. And what's interesting to note is that Spain and France come out of these conflicts with a new approach to the Native Americans. They take a different approach, more diplomatic approach, and a more integrated approach. So integrating them into the community and working with them. And that's very important. And we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about them. We're going to mostly focus on the English portion of this. But I want to point out that their approach is much different, but they still have conflict with Native American tribes. Specifically, like with the French, they have conflict with the Iroquois, who had allied with New York under the British, and the British those English colonists pushed the Iroquois to attack New France. Also, France will deal with some direct conflict with England in the Hudson Bay colony, where the English begin to try to get into the French fur trade, and or the Canadian fur trade against the French. In the Spanish holdings in the southern United States, particularly in New Mexico, what we see is that after the Pueblo Revolt is put down, the Spanish still have issues with the horse riding tribes, like the Comanches, the Apaches, the Navajos. Those tribes continue to cause problems for the Spanish, and so what they do is they actually ally themselves with the Apaches, and they make kind of better alliances with the Pueblo, and they attempt to integrate things better, and really let the Native American tribes of the area live out their lives, and not be so autocratic about what they need to do. This is in contrast to what the English are going to do at this time, which is very much a similar in the sense that there's conflict early on in the 1670s, 1680s, But out of this conflict, what we get is, instead of a diplomatic or measured approach, we get a more aggressive approach being adopted, and the colonists will continue for a lot of different reasons to be kind of belligerents in that area. They will continue their expansion. A lot of this has to do with the geographic power of the English colonies, especially in terms of size of population, the growing population, allowing them to sustain wars for longer periods of time. Their growing economic power, their growing political power. And while it is dominated by conflict even beyond the 1680s, I want you to remember that it is not completely a conflict-ridden relationship between Native American tribes and the English. They do have some diplomatic ties with different Native American tribes. And so we have to understand that while they did take a much more aggressive role against the Native Americans and a belligerent role than the French and the Spanish did, they still did have those diplomatic ties. So I don't want us to think that the narrative of English colonization is completely the aggressive expansion, but it is dominated by that, and we do need to recognize that. The first conflict I want to talk about is this Metacom's, or King Philip's War. And what's interesting about this is that Metacom's people had a friendship with the Puritans, and through a series of different events, they eventually will go into conflict with them. And so this pits the Massachusetts and Connecticut colonies against the Wampanoags and the Narragansetts, who are under the leadership of Metacom, or as the English call them, King Philip. And it's interesting for a couple of reasons. One, as in here, the Indians are going to use some interesting tactics, and they're going to fight very fiercely throughout those colonies. And another interesting thing to note is that the colonists are going to respond with attacks against all settlements, even the settlements of Christian Indians, or those prayer towns. And so that's something that's kind of different. And, long story short, the colonists eventually win. They are going to be helped by the Mohawk and Mohegan tribes, so that they're going to get those tribes to help. Metacom will be killed, and hundreds of his supporters are sold into the West Indian slave trade. And the West Indies is in the Caribbean. So if you were to look at a map, that's the modern day Caribbean and island nations. So with that, I want you to look at this map of the sort of the theater map of Metacom's war. And one, I want to point out that this is not an isolated incident. This is not just happening at one or two places. This is happening all throughout the Massachusetts Bay, Plymouth colony, and Connecticut colony. And so it's widespread. And it starts down here, if you follow my cursor, in Swansea. And what we see is these towns that are in red. These are towns that are destroyed. And one thing that we can note here is that the towns that are destroyed, you look at, there's kind of a pattern in a sense that most of them are in the interior. Okay, they're not on the coast, like on the Massachusetts Bay Coast, Cape Cod, Nantucket Sound, and Long Island Sound. Most of this is happening in the interior. And this makes sense because on the coast, the colonists would have been stronger, especially in towns like Boston and Manchester, and New Haven, and other towns that were strong at the time. Nonetheless, we do see some large towns such as Plymouth that do experience damage, but most of the fighting that occurs is in this interior, where the Native Americans have a large presence, and where the colonists are weaker. And this is also the areas where they are engaging each other, where that conflict is happening between expansion of those land holdings of the English colonists expanding into Native American lands. And so this is very much something that is not just localized, it's widespread. And it's significant too in the fact that if you look at this, about half of the major towns of this area are either destroyed or damaged. So that's a very significant amount fighting that went on. And so I want you to understand that this is not just an isolated event, and that this really does, for quite some time, beset the people of New England. This is a very costly war for them, for both the Native American and the English colonists. This here kind of goes to the discussion of the Native American tactics and things. This here is a depiction of a iron cast for lead shot. And what the Native Americans would do, they were using English and Dutch muskets, but instead of just firing one single ball, they would fire multiple balls, 6 to 7 balls, almost kind of like a shotgun. And they were also working on their marksmanship, became exceedingly excellent in marksmanship. And this was very important because many of the settlers were not engaging in this. And I want to show you something that differed in their tactics. I'm going to draw a line here and show you. So this here, this line represents a British or an English colonial battle line. Okay, and what they would do with their muskets is they would all line up in a long line like this, a group line, and they would fire without aiming, really just in the general direction. So these black lines kind of showing you the firing pattern. So they would just fire, you know. So it was just, you know, bring your guns to bear and fire and hope to hit something. And this works well when the other side is lining up, you know, directly opposite you as well. On the other hand, what the Native Americans were doing, what Metacom had been doing, his warriors, was Metacom was having his men get rid of the eraser here and go back to the pen. And if I can get the eraser to go off. There we go. So Metacom was having his men not just lined up in a single line like this, but instead was in, I'm trying to get the pen to work again. I apologize. Having a couple technical difficulties here. That's not what I want to do here. I'm going to pause real quick while I try to figure this out. I apologize. Okay, we're back. I have figured it out. I apologize about that. So we'll go back to sharing that there, and specifically back to this. So what he would have his warriors do is not only would they be taking aim, which is very different than what the English were doing, they wouldn't be simply just lining up in a line. So they would, you know, imagine, you know, here's a forest. They'd be hiding behind trees, and, you know, this is kind of a rough just depiction of what's going on. But they'd be hiding behind trees, you know, maybe in little gullies, and maybe trying to outflank the opponents and things. And again, using guerrilla tactics and using tactics that are different than what the Native American or what the English colonists were doing. And so that was very effective. And despite this effective nature of warfare, like I said, Metacom and his group, the Narragansetts and Wampanoags, will lose. And again, that owes to the that's owed to the cooperation that the English had from the Mohawks, Mohegans, who helped them defeat this. So this is not the only conflict in the English colonies. Another conflict that occurs is in Virginia. Pardon me. And the Virginia's Indian War is interesting for a couple of reasons. One, in that it is a war between the people of Virginia and the Native American tribes there, specifically the Dogs and the Susquehannocks. But it also sparks a rebellion, and it shows a class fracture that's very important. That's going to end up bringing in something very important that lasts a very long time. So let's talk about this. Governor William Berkeley, who was the governor of Virginia at the time, Uh, he is initially going to favor a defensive war. He doesn't want to go out and seek the Native American tribes. He wants to basically create forts throughout the frontier and have them come to them. And the colonists, especially in the frontier, they look at this Berkeley as this elite who is refusing to go out and meet the enemy. And one thing I want to show you here is this map here. So what we're talking about is very much a system in which Berkeley is protecting these settled areas, okay, right along here in the Chesapeake Bay area. And these men of the interior, they are the ones that are calling for him to come out from here and to attack the different tribes. Specifically, they want him, especially up here, to go on the offensive. Berkeley does not want to do this, and this really pits the frontiersmen who are often working class, or they're poorer, that they don't have as large land holdings, not large planters, against the elite of Virginia. And so what we see is this very distinct sort of idea of the elite wanting to fight a defensive war, and sort of the common colonists, especially those from the interior, wanting to fight this aggressive offensive war. And Berkeley's strategy is not only defensive, but it's also more expensive in the fact that he imposes higher taxes, and a lot of these frontiersmen begin to look for an alternative, and they find an alternative in Nathaniel Bacon. And now this picture here depicts one of those frontier towns, very simplistic in nature, not large plantations. These are small holdings that these people have. And so this is kind of indicative of what we're talking about on the frontier. And so they're living in stark contrast to those who are living on the coast in the more settled areas. And so Nathaniel Bacon, he's kind of a charlatan in one of the different ways. He's related to Berkeley. He's actually not even allowed to trade with the Indians due to Berkeley's edict on that. But anyway, he basically gets a group of men together, and against the will of Berkeley, he goes on the attack. And it's interesting to note that in his attack on Native American villages, he does not kill any belligerent Indians. He only kills those that were peaceful to him. And he also at times will take prisoners, often taking them from tribes who are working with his rebellion, who have captured and killed other tribes. And then he's going to use those captives and say that they are his own, and he touts himself as this great Indian killer, and that he can protect the frontier when he indeed is not. He's also, because of this aggressive nature, Berkeley is going to essentially declare him in rebellion, and Bacon will eventually, through a lot of different ins and outs, and you can read about this, he will eventually defeat the colonial government at a very high cost, but he's not able to manage the frontier. And once Berkeley is able to take back control, this happens because Bacon dies of disease, and then Berkeley is able to reestablish control of the colony. This will lead to some important social reforms, and this is something that's interesting. Remember, I had said that this is kind of a class fracture. This is a fracture between the working class or the poor and the elite. And so what happens out of this is that they pass new legislation that restricts Africans' freedom in Virginia, and really starts to racialize slavery, in saying that free blacks have limited ability to do much, and most blacks in the colony of Virginia would have been slaves. And so what this does is it brings those elite planters in government along with the commoners together in this united belief that even though they're different in a lot of different ways, especially socially and economically. They come together, unfortunately, under this idea of racial solidarity and white supremacy. And so this will mean a very racialized idea of slavery, and it will be a beginning to that very racist legacy that we have throughout the southern United States, although it's not only there, but certainly something that is there. So again, if you look on this map, this does show Bacon's two campaigns that he engaged on. But again, in your book, you can read a little more about it and kind of get an idea of what exactly is going on. With that said, though, I want to move on to the theory of mercantilism and kind of discuss this in the sense of why these colonies were expanding, because we've seen this expansion. We've talked about a couple of the wars, but why are they doing this? Well, mercantilism says that nations are powerful and they derive that power. The powerful nations derive their power from their wealth. So the power of a nation is directly proportional to its wealth. And so in that, colonies are necessary, are absolutely critical for economic growth, because just in Europe alone, they're kind of boxed in. So they need to go out and build these colonies to continue increasing their wealth. And so really, it becomes sort of a system of either you're growing or you're shrinking. You can't just maintain. And so nations really have a lot of control over their commerce. And this is very important to see why the British colonies at this time are going to be expanding, because there's a push from the home nation, from England itself, to expand, to increase profits. And so for lots of different reasons, if they can increase those commodities, they can trade them. And really here, like it says here, the balance of trade is important. Healthy nation imports less than it exported. So they have a positive balance of trade, meaning, they're the ones that are making things and selling it across the world. And these exports that they have are something that sustains their power. So that mercantilism is very important into understanding why we see expansion at this time. We also see at this time, especially in regards to the British, a concerted effort by the Crown to really control what's going on. And the Navigation Acts deal with this specifically. One of the big things is having these enumerated commodities, such as sugar and tobacco, and saying that they can only be shipped from the colony of origin to England or another colony. And then from England, they can be shipped overseas to wherever. And so that really puts the economic power in the hands of the home country, of the colonial power, and not the colony itself. And this is very important. And this is something that really chafes a lot of the colonists. And this is happening under the Stuart monarch of Charles II, which you might remember his father was the one that was deposed in the English Civil War in the 1640s, and then eventually loses a war to Oliver Cromwell and is beheaded. But eventually we do see Charles II come back to power, and the Stuart monarch is brought back in, and they have a very absolutist tone, and they're also Catholic. And so this causes a crisis in England for a lot of different things. And Bacon's rebellion is highlighted in this crisis, because one of the problems that the Stuart monarch sees is they feel like they're losing control of the colonies, and so they want to really have a strong sense of control in the colonies. We also see some issues with the fact that Charles II has a childless royal marriage, and so the succession is going to go to James, or the Duke of York, who is a Catholic. And when Charles II dies, James takes over, and this causes a lot of problems. And also note that Charles II in 1681 is going to dissolve Parliament, and he's going to rule without a Parliament for quite some time. And this causes a lot of people to, one, be worried about a Catholic dynasty, which is those fears are going to only increase here in a second. We'll see why. And two, really worry about absolutism and the power of the people, the rights of the English. This is important. This goes back all the way to the Magna Carta. So this is something that's been ingrained in the English. And constitutional monarchy is something that was somewhat established in that English Civil War, but it's not completely there yet. And we're going to see it really finally established with this glorious revolution. So with the exclusion crisis, what happens is the Parliament wants to exclude James from succession, and they want to have the succession be to his Protestant daughters. And there becomes this struggle amongst different parties in England. The Tories, they support the Stuart monarch, who is James. And the Whigs, they wanted James's Protestant daughters to marry and change the rules of succession. And so these two parties struggle in Parliament. And what's interesting to note is that once James gets he has a son, the Tories, even though they're supporting the Stuart monarch, their worry of a Catholic dynasty overcomes that, and they actually support this glorious revolution. Before we get to the revolution itself, we need to talk about what's going on in New England and in the American colonies in general. The autocratic governor of New York, Edmund Andros, who had been appointed by Charles II, by this time, James II has ascended to the throne, and he appoints Edmund Andros to reorganize New England politically. And what they do is, and I'll show you a quick map here. I'm going to move a little bit fast here, but all the colonies north of Pennsylvania, so this entire area is going to be consolidated into one colony, okay, under Andros during this time. And that causes a problem for a lot of different reasons. One, Andros abolishes the legislative assembly, so there's no representative democracy there. He keeps a permanent revenue act in place. He ends up having to suppress the tax revolt. And Andros is seen as, this authoritarian arm of the Catholic James, okay? And so they really, the New England colonists really begin to chafe under this leader in Andros, and they start wanting, pining for the right to have consent of the governed, to have a legislative body again. And so that brings us to the glorious revolution itself. So, like I said, James has a son, and this really ignites the fears again. And both the Tories and the Whigs, of course, are going to say, okay, we cannot allow a Catholic dynasty. So what they do is William of Orange, who is the stadtholder of the Netherlands, he's a royalty in the Netherlands, he's a Dutch royalty. He had married Mary, who is the Protestant daughter of James II. The Parliament invites him to England, basically to assume the throne, and they basically just do this bloodlessly. William does land with 21,000 troops, so it's not like he's coming without support. And James flees to Catholic France, and there's no bloodshed. But what happens out of this is that, one, in England, this cements parliamentary supremacy. Okay, Parliament has invited this king in, and basically what they're saying is, we have the right to choose our king. We will have a king, but we have the right to choose them, and if we don't see them fit, we can change them. And they don't completely go away from succession. Remember, they still have Mary. She's so there's still a Stuart monarch there, but they changed it a little bit because James and then his son was not an acceptable heir in the Tories and Whigs opinion. We also see this as a very strong establishment of the idea of constitutional monarchy and the supremacy of Parliament. But in England, we have to realize that Parliament is seen as the voice of the people, and so this is really representative democracy happening there. And so, despite it being very much, it's not what we would consider today representative democracy. There's landholders are the only ones voting, and it's only men and over 21. A lot of people are excluded from this democracy. Nonetheless, it's much more democratic than an absolute monarchy. With that, we won't just see a change in England. We're going to see a change in the colonies, and so we'll see upheavals and throughout the colonies. We will see a restoration of New England. They will break back out into the separate colonies. So they'll get rid of that large colony that was under Andros, and they're going to begin getting their legislative bodies back. And it really eats away at the idea of absolutist governors governing these colonies. Okay, these colonies begin to have their own representative government, even though the Parliament and the Crown are still appointing some governors in royal colonies and in in proprietary colonies. Corporate colonies. Proprietary colonies are very much autonomous, but they still are going to work with the Crown. But those royal colonies and those corporate colonies are going to have appointed governors and sometimes legislative bodies. They're still going to be having some sort of elected body. And so this is very interesting in the sense that it's very important that the Glorious Revolution doesn't just change things in England, it changes things in the English colonies in America. So the autocratic rule is abolished in Massachusetts in 1691. They get a new colonial charter. New York passes a modified Charter of Liberties, which had been outlawed under Andros. And then Maryland rebels win a royal government from England. They establish an Anglican church in the colony. This changes Maryland a lot because remember, Maryland had initially been a colony that was established by Lord Baltimore for the religious toleration of Catholics, so it's going to change the makeup of that colony immensely. You guys can read a little more about the Salem witch trials on your own. I don't want to talk about it too much in this, really at all in this lecture, but be aware of that as well. And I want to really kind of move on to this last little piece here, and that is to say that we've been talking about these colonies and you've been reading about them, but it's good to have the mental maps. We hear these names and we probably think in terms of today, but look at this map that's on page 88 and you see what the makeup at this time of the colonies are. And so what we see in red are these royal colonies. These are colonies. Maine is part of Massachusetts. This is the Massachusetts colony right here. Okay, we have New Hampshire and New York, New Jersey, Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. And so we have those 7 royal colonies. Then we have 3 proprietary colonies. These proprietary colonies, even though they were autonomous from England, they still understood that they're having to deal with England. And that they were English in nature, and so they will listen to the Crown. They will not try to for lack of a better term, buck the Crown. And then we also have these corporate colonies of Connecticut and Rhode Island. And so this is important to understand that while we see all this land that they claim, okay, you see all these areas that they claim. The effective use of the land where they actually are settled is very much different than where they're claiming. And it's very much along the coasts. So follow my cursor here. I'll bring the pen up and kind of draw here. So down here in Charleston and down here along the coast, all this area, okay? So this is where the major centers in here. But these are the major centers of settlement, okay? We don't see, circle there, We don't see a lot of the settlers in the interior, okay? But they are expanding out there. And this is the source of that conflict when we think about it. This is where those Native American tribes have gone to. Now, not all of them have completely vacated these areas, but many of them have been pushed out either through war or through treaty with the different colonies, okay? And so it's important to note that despite the fact that, when we look at a map of this, we see them claiming vast swaths of land. In fact, Virginia claims all the way to the sea out here. Same thing with North Carolina. In reality, we see, still a relatively small area that they are occupying, but they are expanding, and this expansion is causing some of those problems. So with that said, that's what I wanted to talk about in Chapter 3. I hope it's been helpful. If you guys have any questions or comments, or maybe if I made a mistake, or if you want me to clarify something, email me or call me, stop by my office, and I'll talk with you. The last thing I want to talk about before I stop here is our project guidelines. And the purpose of the project is to help familiarize you with the historical research process. And it really is designed for you to interpret an aspect of early American history. So what I'm looking for is for you to pick a topic or an event that occurred or was going on between pre-Columbian history and 1865. So a very large area, but I want it to be focused in North America, and I want it to be something that you can tie into American history somehow. And so there's going to be two portions to this project. There's a written component and then a hands-on creation of your design. The written component is designed to help you demonstrate your ability to convey historical information in a scholarly tone. And the hands-on component is designed to help stimulate your creative and interpretive side, and to help you craft something that's going to better connect you with that topic that you choose, okay? And so what I mean by craft is that I want you guys to create a physical thing. So I don't want PowerPoints. I want, a lot of my students do maps, but I want them hand drawn, or I want you to take some time to actually put them together yourself. You could do some sort of digital design, as long as it's your doing and not just simply getting designs from somewhere else. I had a student who studied and researched a little bit about the Underground Railroad and the quilt blocks, and she created quilt blocks. Then I also had a student who studied the battle between the Merrimack and the Monitor, which was a battle between ironclads in the Civil War. What he did was he created a paper version of those two ironclads. And so get creative. The only thing that I ask is that you don't create any usable weapons, so no spears, no muskets, things like that. If you want to do a timeline, that's fine, but just remember that we have to bring these on campus, so avoid weapons. I think you all probably know that, but anyway, I want you to get creative. For those of you who have emailed me and asked for topics, I will be sending out topics shortly, and we can discuss them more in class. Like I said, we're going to have the proposal due on September 18th. So if you look here, it's due on the 18th instead of the 11th. That's going to be via Canvas. So questions in class I'll answer. Really, the proposal just makes sure that I know you have a topic and that you're going to begin working on it. We also have 2 rough drafts that are due. This helps me know that you're working on it, give you notes on it, help you understand some areas where you can improve your research, and also just make sure that I give you feedback. So that's why we have those 2 rough drafts. Then the final project, everything is due via Canvas. Final project is going to be due on December 4th. And then we're going to do presentations, very short presentations, on the 6th in class at our meeting. The expectations of the project, you can read those here. They do need to be approved by me. I noticed here that proposal must be created. I have an old date there, so I'm going to update that. So we're going to put September 18th in there, and I will save that and adjust that at some point. I apologize. So you will be required to do a 5-minute presentation. I have my grading guidelines right here. 75% of the grade will be based on the paper, and 25 will be on the visual aid or item that you create. The requirements are here. You can go through them. I have requirements for the proposal. Specifically, I want to talk about that real quick. I'll highlight that. The proposal must include a description of the desired topic and why the topic interests you. You also need to indicate what you're going to create, that physical component, and how it relates to the topic. And then I have guidelines for the drafts and the final paper. And don't forget, I need a cover page. That's something that I require, and it does not count towards the word count requirement, and also references. You need to be making references. We'll talk about academic honesty in class on Tuesday. So as always, if you guys have any questions, here's my email. There's my office number and extension. You guys also have my cell phone number. And then I also am available Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 in the Trio office. So, stop by if you need me. And like I said, with that said, I appreciate you guys listening. Like I said, I apologize for this being up so late, but it was technical difficulties, new computer, everything should be working well. And I look forward to continuing making these and helping you with that. I will see you all in class on Tuesday. Have a great day.